Alright. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما صلى الله عليه وسلم. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, Surah Al-Qamar, He reveals to us and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions some ayats where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referencing a miracle that occurred during the life of the Prophet sallallahu اقتربت الساعة وانشق القمر, that the hour has drawn near and the moon is split into two. وإن يروا آية يعرضوا ويقولوا سحر مستمر. And yet whenever they see a sign, they turn away saying that it is the same old magic. وَكَذَّبُوا وَاتَّبَعُوا أَهْوَاءَهُمْ وَكُلُّ أَمْرٍ مُسْتَقِرٍ. That they rejected the truth and followed their own desires, and every matter will be settled. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُمْ مِنَ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ مَا فِيهِ مُزْدَجَرٌ. That even though the stories of destroyed nations that have already come to them as a sufficient deterrent for what they are doing in rejecting the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and rejecting the miracles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happened here is that in an attempt to stump Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the disbelievers, or the disbelievers from the Quraysh clan, they demanded that there will be an undeniable sign that is sent to them. And this undeniable sign, they wanted to be directly from God, and they wanted to see it for themselves. And the sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed them was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam splitting the moon, which was obviously done by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this moon was split before their eyes, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he pointed to the sky and he said, Ashhadu, bear witness to this moon splitting into two parts. And so the crowd of the disbelievers, they were baffled essentially. Right? And so they started saying that Muhammad has cast a spell on us. But since he could not have cast a spell on everyone, they decided to ask the travelers that were in the surrounding areas if they saw what they did. And so they sent riders racing out to question those beyond the city of Mecca. And when they asked them, they too confirmed that they saw the exact same phenomenon in the night sky, that the moon was split into two, and we had no idea what was going on. However, ultimately, as we know, the mushrikun, the idolaters of Quraysh, they chose to deny the signs. They chose to deny it. And so they were focused on denying. And there's a lot of luminaries of hadith that have independently verified this narration of the moon being split into two as mutawatir. Mutawatir grade reporting of this miraculous event. And mutawatir means that there is an abundance of narrators that the idea of them all colluding together to concoct a lie is impossible. Meaning about like 40 or so or even more. Some, muhaddithun say, no, even if it's just 10 or more, 20 or more, 30 or more, 40 or more. But the idea is that there's a lot of companions that narrated this story at different times, in different places, in different moments. And they all shared the exact same details, that it was just impossible for them to actually be colluding in this kind of lie, right? So those who graded this hadith as mutawatir is as-Subki, right? Ibn Hajar, Al-Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir, Ibn Abd al-Barr, and others. Now, mutawatir, an example of mutawatir, just so that we can understand it in our kind of terms, in our kind of context. and to understand how impossible it is for someone to be lying about a mutawatir hadith. Let's say, for example, that outside of the masjid, there is a very beautiful yellow flower that is growing in one of the flower beds outside the masjid. Right? It's blossoming, it looks great, it smells nice, it catches everybody's attention. So let's say I'm sitting here and Mus'ab, he comes running into the masjid, he says, Akram, Akram, look, there's a beautiful flower outside. Right? And I'll say, are you sure it's not you? No, I'm just joking. But is it possible that Mus'ab could be making it up? Right? It's possible. He's a trustworthy person. He's a good Muslim. Inshallah. He's a good Muslim. He's a trustworthy person. Just came back from Umrah, may Allah accept. Right? I have no reason to doubt that he's lying. Right? But let's just say for the sake of the argument that it could be 50-50. He could be lying, he could be not. There's the possibility is there. But then I'm sitting here, and I'm like, okay, good. 2 minutes later, Zayd comes in. And he says, Akram, did you see the yellow flower outside? Now, the fact that 2 people have told me there's a yellow flower outside that I haven't seen increases the likelihood that it's true. Right? Then 2 minutes later, Qasim comes and he tells me the same thing. Now the likelihood increases even more. What's the likelihood that these 3 people came in at different times, at different moments, they were doing something else during their day, and they all came and told me the exact same thing? So now, just with 3 people, I'm like, all right, I'm sold. There's definitely a flower outside. Let me go check it out. Right? And I go see, and there's a flower indeed outside. Now imagine when 40 people do that. All trustworthy, honest people, good Muslim, honest people are doing that. This is the example of this hadith right here, of the moon being split into 2. And I say this because oftentimes what happens is we put this bizarre objection to this incident that Orientalists or maybe people that are trying to, I don't know, modernize Islam or whatever that means, that because it's scientifically impossible, therefore it has to be an event that did not occur, right? But the splitting of the moon was a miraculous phenomenon, something that transcended natural order. So to put it based on the same criteria as scientific or the worldly order is going to render it a flawed idea, because in its essence, it's supposed to transcend the natural order. That's what a miracle is, right? So then people will say things like, oh, there's no geographical or geological trace on the moon's surface that this happened. Well, it's like, that's kind of the point though. It's a miracle, right? And another objection is why people beyond the Prophet's audience did not see the moon split, which there's a very weak objection because there are some founded historical records that global visibility of the miracle did happen, and and also there was visibility, again, like we mentioned, that they were outside in Mecca. So if you're claiming that it's magic, you're claiming it's an illusion, you're claiming it's a trick, then it's only going to occur to the people that are around, not necessarily everybody in the world. But since people that were outside of the vicinity also confirm this to be true, then that confirms it and increases the likelihood that it was true, and we believe it to be 100% true. So after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ performed this miracle, and many Quraysh and many people outside the city of Mecca are starting to become attracted to Islam, the Quraysh started to begin to realize that this Islam looks like it's here to stay. It's attracting people. People are starting to like the ideology. People are seeing the hope that it gives them. Those who are slaves, who are poor, who are seen as second-class citizens in society are adopting this ideology because it gives them hope. It gives them justice. It gives them value. It gives them purpose. And we haven't been able to do that. So the leaders of Quraysh started to get a little worried, a little scared. So in order to kind of tame the situation that was going on of individuals across the tribe, across the city of Mecca, accepting Islam, they tried to bargain with the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They said, look, what do you want? Let's do something where, one day we worship Allah and the other day you worship our idols. How about that? Right? 1 month you worship our God, 1 month we worship your God. How about that? Right? 1 year you worship our God, 1 year we worship your God. How about that? Does that sound good? Right? We'll make a deal here. We'll compromise. What do you want? Do you want money? Is that what you want? Are you trying to become rich? You're trying to become powerful off of this? So we'll give you all the money that you want. We'll give you everything that you want. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? No, to everything you just said. Worshipping your God some days, some years, some months, and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala some days and some years. No. Money? No. Okay, what do you want? Do you want women? We're going to give you all the women in the world. We'll give you everybody. No, that's not what I want either. The thing is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he wasn't interested in all that. And that is a testament of his truth of prophethood. And it's a proof of his prophethood. That he was offered the world time and time again. He was offered a whole entire kingdom. He was offered all of Arabia. And he said time and time again, no, that's not what I want. The mission here is very clear, and you guys better stop. You better be careful, or you're going to face the same end as the people of Ad and Thamud, which is a very nasty end. And he told them this because Ad and Thamud specifically are Arab tribes that were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the past because their prophets Salih and Hud alayhim salam tried to get them towards the religion of Islam and to submission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to abandon idols and abandon bad practices, but they were rejected. They were rejected by their people, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed their people. So the Arabs were very familiar with the tribes of Ad and Thamud, and they know exactly what happened to them. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ is bringing up these tribes specifically. And so when they realized that no matter how much of the world we throw at this guy, he's never going to accept, they started to go through other means. They began to use foul language against the Prophet ﷺ and Jibreel alayhi salam. Right? They started cursing him. They started invoking curses on them. They started, invoking their idols to curse the Prophet ﷺ and Jibreel alayhi salam, which is a very dumb thing to do because, you put up the idols against Allah, Allah's going to win 100 out of 100 times. One thing they tried to do is they tried to intellectually stump the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the people of Quraysh were like, all right, let's see here. We don't know much about scripture. We don't really read, we don't really write, but we know of people that do. There are some Jews in Medina who are very intelligent. They're people of the book. They can write, they can read. We'll go to them and we'll ask them how we can have rebuttals against the Prophet ﷺ and intellectually stump him. So they go to the Jews in Medina and they inquire about what to ask him. And so they say, right, they consult the Jewish rabbis, and the rabbis advise the Quraysh to ask the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ 3 questions. If you ask him these 3 questions, if he answers all 3, then he's a liar. If he answers none of the 3, then he's also a liar. Because he's only going to be able to answer 2, and one of them he's not going to be able to answer. The first question was about some men of long ago, right? Christian men who had left their people and had a very interesting experience after facing a lot of persecution because of their monotheism and oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about them in the Quran in Surah Al-Kahf, إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ فَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا آتِ مِن لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. That these folks, these youth, they took refuge in the cave and they said, our Lord, grant us mercy from yourself and guide us rightly through our ordeal. And the second question had to do about a traveler. who had journeyed to the ends of the earth in the east and in the west. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنْ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ قُلْ سَأَتْلُو عَلَيْكُم مِّنْهُ ذِكْرًا. And the third question was about the spirit, the soul. And what is the soul? Right? The first two he should be able to answer, and the last one he should not be able to answer. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلُ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُ مِنْ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. But they ask you, O Prophet, about the ruh, the soul. Its nature is only known to Allah, and you, humanity, have not been given but a little bit of knowledge of it. So the Quraysh, now that they are excited about this, right? We have these three questions that we can send to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They asked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam these three questions. The Prophet told them, I don't know the answer to these questions, and it's because I haven't been revealed the answers yet. Again, showing the testament of his prophet. He's not just going to make up answers on the spot. He's going to wait for revelation to occur. So he says, come to me tomorrow and I will have answers for you. Right? However, the next day comes by and there was no answers. So he says, come the next day. And then the next day occurs and he has no answers. And now the people in Quraysh are starting to pick on him, starting to laugh at him, or starting to mock him, say he doesn't know anything. See, we stumped him. We did it. He can't answer our questions. And this happened for some days. And then finally, Jibreel alayhi salam revealed the answers to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then he also explained the reason for the delay. He told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ولا تقولن لشيء إني فاعل ذلك غدا. Never say of anything tomorrow, this will happen tomorrow, إلا أن يشاء الله, without adding inshallah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't saying inshallah when he would say, come to me tomorrow and I will have the answers. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through Jibreel alayhi salam, is teaching him a lesson, is teaching him about manners. And this is a very beautiful point for us. It's beautiful in two ways. One, it teaches us the importance of making sure that we always say inshallah about things that we do, because we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one who is in control of everything. He is the one who is in power of everything. And without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are nothing. This is one of the beautiful lessons here in these verses. But what's also beautiful about this interaction between Jibreel alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallam is it teaches us that the Prophet Muhammad sallam had a great deal of respect for his teacher. What you notice about the narration is that the Prophet sallam did not respond. The Prophet Muhammad sallam, that's it. He goes quiet. Jibreel alayhi salam tells him this is what you should have done, and he just accepts it wholeheartedly. So the Prophet Muhammad sallam is also teaching us how to be a very good student. That when someone tells us something that is the truth, someone corrects something that we may have, erred in, or made a mistake, or made a flaw in, we don't say, just start to justify. Say, I meant it technically. Of course, inshallah, I don't have to say it out loud every time. Prophet didn't sit there and just try to justify. Rather, he took it and then he implemented the practice, and from then on forward, every time the Prophet ﷺ would say something that is going to occur in the future, he would always add inshallah, because he's a good student and he had a great teacher as well. So the first question was about some young men who remained steadfast in the worship of one God, which is the people of the cave, and they were resisting their people who turned to worship of idols. And no one is sure about the number of youth that were involved. That knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. But they had fallen asleep for about 300 years, 309 years. And they had a dog that was with them. And to anyone who happened to see them, they would have appeared to be awake, and the person would have been filled with fear of them. And when they finally awoke, it seemed to them as if only a short time had passed. But it was then one of them was sent down to buy food, and they learned that they had actually been asleep for centuries, and their tribe had actually ended up converting to the correct religion as well. And so these are the sleepers of the cave, the people of the cave, which is in Surah Al-Kahf. In response to these questions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Kahf. And the answer to the second question was Dhul Qarnayn, which is a story in which an individual by the name of Dhul Qarnayn, which means the owner of the two horns, he had great power, he had been given the ways and means to do all things, he was able to travel throughout the entire world, and he traveled to the setting of the sun, which was set in a murky pool, and nearby there lived a people over whom Dhul Qarnayn had the authority by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to punish or reward, right? Or sorry, not reward, but that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive. And he chose to punish those who did wrong and then send them back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for their judgment. And those who believed in Allah and were righteous, they would be the ones that are rewarded. Then he journeyed to the rising of the sun, so meaning the east and the west, and he found a people who were provided with no protection against the sun. Right? Those people he left alone. And then as part of his answer to the second question, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave more information about the third journey which Dhul Qarnayn made, which the Jewish tribes, the Jewish rabbis in Yathrib didn't even know about, which was the barrier of him defeating the tribe of Yajuj and Majuj and creating a barrier between the people and or the people that were oppressed by the tribe of Yajuj and Majuj and Yajuj and Majuj itself. There was a barrier between those two, right? However, when they tried to pay him, they tried to reward him for it, he did not desire any reward, and he replied that all this power that I receive is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only. Then that third question about the spirit had the shortest answer, which the Quran came and said that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows about it, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has complete knowledge about it, and we have small knowledge about it. We may know some things here and there, but the complete knowledge is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet Muhammad answered all these questions successfully. And so because of this, many more people of the Quraysh started becoming convinced, and the numbers of the believers began to increase. And so as the numbers of the believers increased, the opposition felt that it was increasingly threatening. So now we have to resort to more extreme measures. When the oppressed starts to get more support, the oppressor starts to go through more drastic measures to try to subjugate the oppressed. Right? The statement I just said right here, literally apply it to every time and place where an oppressor has tried to subjugate its oppressed. It will work 100% of the time. It's working. It's happening now. It's happening across the globe. It's happening with our brothers and sisters in Gaza. It's happening with our brothers and sisters in China, in Kashmir, in so many other places. It happened with when Grandala fell with the Spanish composition of Andalus. It happened with the Crusaders when they murdered and massacred so many Muslims in Jerusalem. And at every single time and place, you'll see this happening time and time again. That when the oppressed starts to gain support and starts to move towards this idea of justice and resisting its oppressor, then the oppressor will start to go through more extreme means to start to subjugate the oppressed. And so for 13 years in Mecca, with the truth being clear to the people, they started to engage in physical persecution. They tried to boycott the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They tried to boycott his companions and his family members, even those who weren't Muslim, like Abu Talib. They tried to murder him. They tried to kill him. Multiple assassination attempts throughout his life. So for 13 years in Mecca, there was so many different approaches to stop the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They tried everything except one thing. They didn't try to listen. They didn't take the time for just one moment just to listen. And to realize that if you hear the call of Islam, you will realize that the beauty of Islam is here to remain. It's not going anywhere. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised that His word will shine through till the end of times. So it doesn't matter how many politicians say we need to eradicate Muslims from America, we need to eradicate Islam and its ideology, Sharia law is evil, this and that, right? Or the new Netherlands Prime Minister saying that the Prophet Muhammad is evil and Islam has to be eradicated and he will do anything in his power to do so. I don't care who you are, I don't care how much power you have, I don't care how many people are behind you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that His light will shine no matter what people do to try to extinguish it, so it will happen every single time. It happened in Spain when Muslim would be going underground in the basements to read the Quran and learn about Islam. And then they grew. It happened in the Balkans. It happened in Bosnia, where they tried to extinguish Islam there, and it just grew stronger. It happened when the Mongols almost executed every Muslim on the face of the earth, and it was so bad. And they also tried to throw away all Islamic literature, but it was so bad that they say that the rivers were black because of the ink that was in the books that were thrown into the river. I read once that it's predicted that 95% of Islamic literature was lost that day, where the Mongols took over and just destroyed Islamic literature completely. But Islam rose from the ashes again. What happened? Those same people that tried to destroy Islam, the Mongols 2 generations later, they all became Muslim. All of them, the whole tribe. So it rose again. And it will continue to rise time and time again. The beauty of Islam is here. It is going to remain. It is going to stay. It will always stay until the end of times. And it will always be the truth till the end of times. And the sacrifice of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is why we are here today. He did not run away from these challenges. And that's why we got to appreciate the sacrifices of the early Muslims. They got Islam to us. They didn't know if Islam was going to make it out of the small city of Mecca. They had no idea. They just knew it was true. And I got to do whatever I can to uphold the truth. And I got to pass it on to the next generation. I'm just focused on the next generation. I'm just focused on the next generation. Many of us are so caught up and we're focused on the end of times. Right? And every generation thinks that they're the last generation. From the time of the companions till now, every generation is like, the end of times are near, man. This is it. This is it. You don't think when the Muslims were conquered by the Crusaders in Jerusalem, before Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, where there was almost 100 years in which not one Muslim stepped into Jerusalem. Masjid al-Aqsa did not hear the adhan for 100 years. Not a single person prayed in Masjid al-Aqsa for nearly 100 years. You don't think those Muslims thought that it was end of times? Of course they did. Of course they did. But came back. You'll be brought it back. It rose again. And it will rise again. It will rise again, inshallah. But in order for it to be passed to the next generation, we have to focus on the next generation. Right? So people often ask, what can I do to strengthen Islam? What can I do to help unify the Muslims? What can I do? Well, what can you do is you just focus on the next generation. And the next generation's task will be to focus on their next generation and their next generation. And that cycle is going to continue. And if we do that and we focus that one generation on a time, then alhamdulillah, everything will be okay, inshallah ta'ala. And so when Rasulullah started to call people to Islam publicly, many of the Quraysh felt threatened. They felt that this was a power grab. They felt that he wants just power. He felt that he wanted to be a king. But in reality, what he wanted was to wake them up from Jahiliyyah. Rasulullah wanted them to see the world for what it was, and that it's just a mirage, and what really matters is the akhirah. And the perfect example of this is a narration where the Prophet Muhammad he says that one day جلس جبريل إلى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. that one day Jibreel alayhi salam was sitting with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فنظر إلى السماء فإذا ملك ينزل. That Jibreel alayhi salam and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked up to the sky and they saw an angel descending to them. فقال جبريل إن هذا الملك ما نزل منذ يوم خلق قبل الساعة. So Jibreel alayhi salam said, verily this angel right here has not come down since the day that he was created. This is the first time I'm seeing him come down. قال. So the angel that came down said to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ya Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, أرسلني إليك ربك. My Lord, your Lord, and my Lord has sent me to you. قال أفملكا نبيا يجعلك أو عبدا رسولا. That the angel said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I'm just make sure I get the translation correct here. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, O Muhammad, your Lord has sent me to you with the offer that I make you a prophet king or a servant messenger. Okay. So you can either become a king and a prophet, which if you chose that, you're still a prophet. You're still going to get the highest ranks of paradise, and you'll be a king. Or you can be a servant messenger. And so Jibreel alayhi salam, again, remember, Jibreel alayhi salam is not only just the messenger, the person who is delivering wahi to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He doesn't just deliver it and go. He teaches the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he stays with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam until the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam not only receives the revelation, but it is enveloped in the heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so it's preserved. And then he also teaches the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam what these verses mean, so that he can go and teach the companions. So the Jibreel alayhi salam is the teacher, is the shaykh of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Jibreel alayhi salam being his shaykh, being his murabbi, he tells the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, tawada ya Rasulullah, tawada li rabbik ya Muhammad. Show humility in front of your Lord, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said what? Bal abdun rasulan. Okay, I will be a servant messenger. And that is who the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. That is why he said, Sayyid al-Qawm Khadim, that the leader of their people is their servant. The one who serves the people is the one who is their leader, not the one who expects to be served. He wanted to teach the world not to be like hungry, bloodthirsty zombies that's chasing this world, because there's nothing for you here. It's a mirage. That this world is a mirage in a desert. The thirsty perceives it as water, but when they approach it, what happens? They find nothing. So that's what this world is. Constantly chasing pleasure that's not there. Constantly trying to find contentment that's not there. It's only in one place, and that's with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And turning to Allah. So he wanted people to think the truth is right in front of them, but they could not see it. Shaitan distanced themselves from Tawheed. It's ironic that the symbols of Tawheed that were right in front of them, the Kaaba, literally being built by Ibrahim alayhi salam and being called Baytullah. Baytullah wasn't a term that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came up with himself. Baytullah was always the term. So even during the time of the Quraysh, before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started preaching the message of Islam, they were calling it Baytullah. They saw the Safa and Marwa mountains right there where Hajar alayhi salam did the same, and the Zamzam water came up. They saw the miracle of the elephants, the elephant tribe, the army of the elephants with Abraha and the birds coming to destroy those who were trying to destroy the Kaaba. They witnessed this. They witnessed this the symbols of Tawheed is literally all around them. But Shaitan made them distance themselves from Tawheed completely by setting up idols and building idols and worshipping that instead. And so the Quraysh, they tried to combat against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they went through very extreme measures in doing so. When people would accept Islam in the early days, the Quraysh not only came after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they would not spare the companions either. So one thing they did that they set up to try to weed out the secret Muslims is families need to start questioning their other family members. And if you see any signs or any indication that your family member or somebody from your clan, maybe somebody that is trying to become a Muslim or is secretly a Muslim, it is your job to boycott them. It's your job to lock them up. It's your job to torture them. You should disgrace them publicly, etc., etc. So, as we talked about last week extensively, is some of the physical and verbal abuse that the Prophet ﷺ had to face because of this. But the Prophet ﷺ was a messenger, right? And he was someone who was never willing to compromise the truth. Because if you have no truth, you have nothing. Right? One of the themes of this class that I try to bring up often is that literally the main characteristic of a Muslim is a trustworthy individual. Because if you can't be trustworthy, if we can't be honest, then what do we have? Our entire religion relies on people being trustworthy. The entire thing. The hadith literature, the Quran coming down to us, being passed on from generation to generation, it relies on people being trustworthy, right? Small, quick tangent here, right? The reason you cannot be a Quran-only person, for anybody that might be, thinking about it, right? The reason why I can't be a Quran-only person is because the same people that narrate hadith to us are the same people that preserve the Quran for us. So you either trust all of it or you don't trust any of it. So the Quran and the hadith are both being revealed to us by trustworthy individuals. Time and time again, or not being revealed, sorry, being passed down to us by trustworthy individuals, being narrated. So all of Islam, it requires us to be trustworthy people, requires us to be honest people. And that's why we can never compromise the truth. The truth can never be compromised, right? And so as a matter of fact, it's so important in our deen that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, one day he was asked, right? That one day there was a man who came to ask the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Ayyul jihad afdal? He asked him, what is the best form of jihad? The best form of striving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he says in a Sahih narration, Kalimatu haqq inda sultanin jahil. This is the best form of jihad. That you speak a word of truth against a tyrannical ruler. Because we can't compromise the truth here. That's not something that we do. Right? There's no such thing. And it's during this time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam being negotiated with and being told to worship 1 year and worship the idols 1 year and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 1 year, in which the Surah Al-Kafirun was revealed. And so Surah Al-Kafirun put an end to the idol's delusion that we can ever compromise the truth. You cannot compromise the truth. Right? There's no such thing as truth if injustice is still, or there's no such thing as compromise if injustice is still being enacted after that compromise. So if we were going to compromise 1 year, 1 year, 1 year there's justice and 1 year there's injustice, because there's no greater injustice in this world than shirk. What did I say? I'm going to say it again. There is no greater injustice in this world than shirk. So how can I compromise and there's still injustice that is being enacted. This is a very ajib idea. And that's why the Prophet would not go for it. The truth cannot be compromised, ever. Right? What do we hear in the protests all the time? No justice, no peace. This is literally what it means. Palestine protests are happening every week. No justice, no peace. This is literally it right here. This is an impossible idea. If the truth isn't there, justice is not there, then what compromise am I making? What compromise am I making? By the way, speaking on that, my brothers and sisters here and online, I highly encourage you to please come out to these protests every Saturday. Right? There's protests for Palestine every Saturday at 2 p.m. on Westlake. It's extremely important that we show up for these things. It's extremely important. Number one, I was there on Saturday last week, or this weekend, right? And some others were here. You can ask them. They can testify to this. There was almost 3 to 4 times as many non-Muslims as there were Muslims. We came to pray Salah, Asr Salah before. In the past, some or so weeks, we would pray Salah. We would require a microphone for everybody to hear the Salah. This week, we didn't need a microphone. There was like 3 to 4 rows. There's no microphone needed. That's embarrassing. That is embarrassing. We can't even show up for our own causes? Seriously? We need dua with action. Because we can do both. We are in a position where we can do both. We can do dua and we can show up. Oh, but it doesn't work. The politicians aren't listening. Who cares? The fact of the matter is that it has been said time and time again that the people of Gaza are seeing it. The people of Gaza are seeing these protests. And I'm not just talking about the big one on DC or the million one in the UK. No, they are specifically seeing the Seattle ones too. And what happens when they see it? They make dua for everybody here. They make dua for everybody that's in that protest, that's in that gathering. Don't you want to be one of those that are getting the duas for brothers and sisters in Gaza right now? There's no doubt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is probably closer to them than anything that we can imagine. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He told us in a hadith that on the day of judgment, what's going to happen? That He's going to bring forward someone and He's going to say, why didn't you visit me when I was hungry? Why didn't you feed me when I was hungry? Why didn't you quench my thirst when I was thirsty? Why didn't you come and visit me and heal me when I was sick? And so the servant is going to be astonished at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him. And say, what do you mean? Ya Allah, like you don't go hungry, you're self-sufficient. You don't go thirsty, you can never get sick. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that had you gone to the hungry, you would have found me there with them. Have you gone with the thirsty, you would have found me there with them. Have you gone to the one who was sick, you would have found me there with them. Literally all 3 of these categories apply to our brothers and sisters in Gaza right now. All 3 of them. So the du'as are very special. And they see that support. And they see that no matter how much corruption is going on with the Arab leadership, with the other world leadership, whatever it may be, that the people in mass are standing strong behind them. And it gives them hope. So please, come. Right? I am traveling this weekend, so if anybody doesn't see me there, that's why, okay? I'm not trying to be hypocritical, right? I'm going to Cleveland, and I already found the protest that's happening there, and I'm going to go there, inshallah. Inshallah. Right. Anyways, back to the point here, where we're talking about Surah Al-Kafirun. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Surah Al-Kafirun, right? And there's many reasons why this surah was revealed, but the surah essentially was revealed to, number 1, put an end to the delusions of the disbelievers. Number 2 was to deliver a clear judgment between the 2 groups, the people of Iman and the idol worshippers. And number 3, to refute the nonsensical proposal of the disbelievers, both now and in the future. Okay, this part is important, right? And by the way, this is directly a quote from Safawat al-Tafsir from Sheikh Muhammad Ali Sabuni, where he's mentioning these 3 points. Very famous Syrian Mufassir and scholar. What's important here is this 3rd point, that both now and in the future, the truth cannot be compromised during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and truth and justice cannot be compromised in our time too. It can never be compromised, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم, قل يا أيها الكافرون. Say, O Prophet, O you disbelievers, meaning those who invite you to worship statues and stones. لا أعبد ما تعبدون. I do not worship what you worship. I do not worship the idols and the statues that you worship. I'm not associated with your gods, your objects of worship, which do no harm, they do no benefit, they cannot fulfill the smallest request of its worshiper. If I asked your idol to sustain me with a piece of bread, it would never be able to do it in a million years. Never. But if I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to sustain me, the one who feeds me, the one who makes sure that I'm clothed, the one that makes sure that I have a roof over my head, the one that makes sure that I can breathe, that I can see, that my heart beats every single second, that I can take a deep breath with my lungs that I have, that my blood is flowing through my body, that every neuron in my brain is firing at a rapid rate, billions of neurons at a rapid rate, in order to keep me alive, in order to keep me talking. My tongue works, my taste works, my smell works, my nose works, my ears can hear. My muscles feel fine, my bones are not broken. All through the sustainment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your idol can't do any of that ever. And so the Mufassirun, they say that this specifically was revealed during that time they tried to negotiate with the Prophet Muhammad, right? And this surah was so beloved to the Prophet Muhammad that he starts to recite it, and it becomes a sunnah to recite it in many different prayers, which we will get to in a second, inshallah. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, وَلَا أَنْتُمْ أَعْبِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. You won't worship the Lord that I worship. Okay. I worship the true God who is Allah, the Lord of the worlds, while you worship stones, you worship statues. But the difference between me and you is I worship Ar-Rahman, and you worship people who, and you worship your desires. You worship your statues. وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدْتُمْ. And I will never worship what you worship. Putting emphasis here. It's not just, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never repeats something just because. Every letter in the Quran is perfect, is there for a purpose. So this added emphasis upon what preceded, which was already a disavowal of idols, puts a complete end. Right? It's not even a thought, it's not even an idea in the mind of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ or in our religion in Islam that we will ever worship or venerate these statues. We'll never worship God, not now, not ever. Right? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. So the first one is talking about the now, and the Mufassirun say that the second one, repeating it again, is talking about either now or ever. We will never worship idols. وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. Right? Nor will we ever worship what you worship. Right? Despite all your false claims, we will never worship or وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. Sorry. Nor will you ever worship what I worship. And so, yeah, right. So they will never worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the future, as much as they will worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala now. Now, lakum dinukum waliya din, right? You have your way and I have my way. Now, what's important here to remember is a couple of things, okay? Whenever we talk about idol worship, because it's such a foreign idea to us, we feel like we can't relate. But replace idols with desires, with money, with love for this world, and everything makes sense. That's our current day idols. Anytime our heart is preoccupied with something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we're, committing shirk. And I don't mean shirk in terms of the shari'i sense that, makes you a disbeliever or something. I'm talking about in a spiritual sense. Right? That your heart is occupied with something other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so a testament to our iman, our Islam, is if we say that, oh, you come across something desirable, right? Whether it may be, something, a haram wealth, or a haram act of intimacy, or whatever it may be. Something that is a desire that goes against the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I find my heart inclines towards that more than Allah, then know that my spirituality, I'm not where I need to be. I'm spiritually not where I need to be. Something needs to be fixed here. Because there can't be other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam constantly recited these surahs in salah. So we have narrations that talk about during the duha prayer. The two surahs that he would recite is what? قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ, and then قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. The two rak'at before Fajr, what two surahs are sunnah to recite? It's these two. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ and قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. The two sunnahs after Maghrib, the sunnah to recite these two surahs. Right? During the witr salah, these two surahs are recited as well. So there's no doubt it's from the favorite surahs the Prophet ﷺ loved to read. And it's not because they're short, that's why we love them, right? It's because it's short, it's easy. But the reason why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ loved them so much is because of what it represents. Surah Al-Kafirun is the La ilaha part of La ilaha illallah. That there is no God, so it's constantly negating anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is La ilaha illallah? No God except Allah. So Surah Al-Kafirun is the nafi part. It's the negation part. And Surah Al-Ikhlas is the ithbat part. It's the emphasizing part. Illallah. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. That there is no God except Allah. He is self-sufficient. He does not beget or he is not begotten. He is one. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these two surahs are a manifestation of what we say under our breath, insha'Allah, hundreds of times a day, La ilaha illallah. That is why understanding the adhkar that we say is very powerful. When we say La ilaha illallah, that is one of the best ways to remove anything from our hearts other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in order for that to happen, you actually have to deeply reflect. You can't just say these phrases under your tongue on speed round and not really thinking about what you're saying. Slow it down. If it means that you get less La ilaha illallahs in your day, that's okay, because you were reflecting when you said it, and that's the purpose of it. So when I say La ilaha, literally what I'm imagining is that everything that is in my heart that isn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm removing it. My parents, my spouse, my desires, my work, my money, my fear of death, everything. My fear of being oppressed, everything. Politicians, all of it is being removed from my heart. All of it is being removed. And then we say, illallah. And then the only thing I'm putting back into my heart, or keeping in my heart, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that if I do this enough times throughout the day, 100 times a day or so, if I do this enough times, it becomes a state of being, where in my heart there's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now, don't get me wrong, when I say these things, right? When you're talking about La ilaha illallah, and I'm talking about removing loved ones from your heart, what I mean by that is not that you start to neglect them. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. When you truly understand Allah and what the Prophet ﷺ wanted of us, your relationships will actually get better, not worse. Because now, me being loving to my family, I'm doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not for the sake of some worldly reason. And I fear oppressing my loved ones because I know the one that can hold me to account. And so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam are number 2 or number 3 on our list of people and a list of loyalties, then who's going to keep us in check when we oppress, number one, number two? But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad are number one, then everybody else below that is going to be met with love, justice, and kindness, because my loyalty belongs to those that can hold me accountable. So La ilaha illallah is what? It's the greatest form of dhikr. So they made many attempts to attack the Prophet Muhammad. Abu Talib made it very clear, any attacks toward the Prophet is an attack towards him. And the leaders of Quraysh, they did not want to call to war, but they felt like they really had no choice. So essentially, they tried to do everything they can to oppress the Prophet and his companions, so that when people would accept Islam, they would boycott the Muslims. There's one man by the name of Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, who was actually very close to becoming Muslim. So one day, the Prophet Muhammad was in a gathering with Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, and he has been noticing his tendencies for a while, and notices that Uqba ibn Mu'ayt is starting to have some empathy towards the Muslims, is starting to have some, starting to kind of nod along to what the Prophet Muhammad is saying, agreeing. It's affecting him. So the Prophet is seeing this, but he's not accepting Islam. All the reasons are there except one, which is that he was afraid about social pressure. And so Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, one day with the Prophet Muhammad present, the Prophet calls him out and says, Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, why don't you accept Islam? Right? And the Prophet is not calling him out just to put him in a tough spot just because. But the Prophet Muhammad is calling him out because he sees that Uqba ibn Mu'ayt wants to do that. He wants to accept Islam. And he's right there, he's right on the edge. And the Prophet is so assured, like, just do it. We got you. You have support. And many Muslims feel that pressure every day of their lives. Right? Especially new Muslims. New Muslims have that pressure a lot, where there's that belief that it's true. There's that belief that it's absolutely 100% correct. But out of fear of what family will say, what friends will say, what coworkers will say, what loved ones will say, that social pressure can get to people. It's a hard place to be in. Right? So Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, he does not accept Islam in that moment. However, some of the leaders of Quraysh noticed that Uqba ibn Mu'ayt was starting to have some affinities with Islam. He was empathetic towards the cause. So they said, this is unacceptable. You're either with us or you're against us. You have to be fully in the door. You can't have one foot in, one foot out. Same thing with Islam too. You can't have one foot in, one foot out. So, he had one foot in Jannah at this time. But in order to prove that he's not a Muslim, they told Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, go and spit in the face of the Prophet Muhammad. You have to denounce him in front of everybody. So Uqba ibn Mu'ayt, unfortunately, he does it. He goes and he spits in the face of the Prophet Muhammad. And that is why he's referred to as Ashqal al-Qawm. That's like the most wretched of people. Because he had one foot in Jannah. He was right there. And then not only did he not take it, he deliberately took his foot out, turned around, and went to the other door. You know what the other door is. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he revealed some verses about Uqba ibn Mu'ayt and those who are like him. In Surah Al-Furqan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِي أَتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا. That beware of the day that the wrongdoers will bite his nails in regret. When you get nervous, you bite your nails. Some people bite their nails, right? And so on the day of judgment, those who transgressed against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are going to get very nervous. And they're going to say, oh, I wish I had followed the way along the messenger. يا ويلتا ليتني لم أتخذ فلانا خليلا. Woe to me. I wish I had never taken so-and-so as a close friend. لقد أضلني عن الذكر بعد إذ جاءني. He made me stray away from the reminder, stray away from Islam, stray away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even after it had already reached me. وَكَانَ الشَّيْطَانُ لِلْإِنسَانِ خَذُولًا. And shaitan has always betrayed humanity. And so these verses show us that the type of people who accepted Islam were always ones who were able to prove themselves, and then there were those who were not able to prove themselves and did not accept Islam. It's easy to make claims. It's easy to make claims. It's easy to say, I'm a Muslim. Many people assume if I'm a Muslim, I'm a student of knowledge, I wear the hijab properly, I grow my beard out, I shouldn't be tested. Why test me, ya Allah? Test the guy that drinks alcohol. Test the guy that commits zina. Why are you testing me? I claim that I'm a Muslim. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do people think that once they say we believe, that we will be left without putting them to the test? As we mentioned last week, how many tests the Prophet ﷺ have to go through? The Prophet ﷺ told us in a narration himself, صادق الأمين وصادق المصدوق. He's the most trustworthy that this world has ever seen, the most honest that this world has ever seen. Rasulullah ﷺ himself, he said what? That no one has been tried or tested more than I have. And no one has been tried and tested more than the prophets. And those are the ones who are most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether they are tested or rewarded in this life, they are happy with both circumstances. And the narration continues and says what? To keep going. And those who are closest to the prophets are going to be tested. Those who are closest to them are going to be tested to a lesser degree. And those who are closest to them are going to be tested to a lesser degree, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Right? Another narration tells us that each individual is going to be tested according to their iman. The stronger your iman, the possibility of stronger tests are going to come your way. Right? And again, we talked last week how we don't desire tests. This is not the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Right? The Prophet never asked for tests and trials. He asked for afiyah. He asked for ease and pardoning. That's why one of the du'as that we do in the morning and the evening is Allahumma inni as'aluka al-afiyah. But the idea is that when we are tested, right, we're patient and we don't say anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be displeased with. We don't do anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with. Right? And I'll be patient. I'll find a way. And that's the believer's life. It's a life between sabr and shukr. A life between patience and gratefulness. And you want to find the people on earth that are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you want to find the people on earth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the most, then go towards the people that are being the most tested. Because those are the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is purifying in this life, so that their life in the next life is going to be so great. So much so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment is going to bring forward two individuals. One individual who was tested more than anybody else in this life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to instruct the angels to dip this man into Jannah for 1 second. Narration Sahih Muslim. And after 1 second, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take him out. And before everybody, it says, have you ever felt any pain? Have you ever felt any suffering? And after 1 second in Jannah, this man is going to say, by Allah, I don't even know what pain is. What are you talking about pain? What are you talking about suffering? That's not even real. And the opposite is going to happen too. That the person that had all the pleasures of his life, never grateful, neglectful of Allah, all the riches, everything he ever needed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take him and dip him into the hellfire for 1 second. And take him out and ask him what? Have you ever felt any joy? Have you ever felt any pleasure? And then this man's going to say, what? By Allah, I don't even know what pleasure is. I don't even know what, that doesn't even exist. So after 1 second in our akhirah, we're going to forget this entire world. And all we're going to remember from there on out is either pleasure or pain. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us a performer and not the latter. Ameen. Okay, we'll conclude here, inshallah. I always underestimate how much time we have. For weeks, I've been talking about the trials of the companions. And I'm like, next week we'll do it. Next week we'll do it. Inshallah, next week we'll do it. Inshallah. So we'll conclude here, inshallah ta'ala, and next week. Yeah, there's nothing else. So next week we will talk about the different types of persecution and trial and torture that the companions had to go through in Mecca. So we talked extensively about the Prophet Muhammad specifically. Now we're going to talk about the companions themselves, inshallah. Any questions before we go? I can take one or two questions, inshallah. Sisters, brothers. All right, Jazakallah khair, everyone. I will see you guys next week, inshallah ta'ala. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wa salamun ala al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.